Good evening, and welcome to the second installment of the Abbasi program for Islamic Studies at Stanford University on our 2011-2012 event series, We the People, Islam, and U.S. Politics. This is the second of three events. The first event in the fall focused on images of Islam in Hollywood and the U.S. media. Tonight we are going to be in discussion with an artist, Sandow Birk, about his American Quran project, and I'll be talking a bit more about that as I introduce him and Kamar Adamji. Our third event, which will be in the spring, is a discussion on faith and democracy. The way that we framed this discussion in the spring is to have specialists in Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhist studies, and there will be a moderator, and we will be talking about issues of democracy and faith and how democracy is or is not part of the sort of the central DNA of these faith traditions. And it is essentially an interfaith discussion on democracy. Tonight we're going to be focusing on the American Quran, Sandow Birk's art project. Sandow Birk is a well-traveled graduate of the Otis Parsons Art Institute. Frequently developed as expansive multimedia projects, his work have dealt with contemporary life in its entirety. With an emphasis on social issues, frequent themes of his past work have included inner-city violence, graffiti, political issues, travel, war, and prisons, as well as surfing and skateboarding, which is marvelous work. He received an NEA International Travel Grant in Mexico City in 1995, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1996, and a Fulbright Fellowship to Rio de Janeiro in 1997. In 1999, he was awarded a Getty Fellowship, followed by a City of Los Angeles Fellowship in 2001. In 2007, he was an artist in residence at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., and at the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris in 2008. His most recent project, which he'll be discussing this evening, involves a consideration of the Quran as relevant to contemporary life in America. And tonight, Sandow is going to be in dialogue with Dr. Kamar Adamji, who is the Associate Curator of South Asian Art at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Her main area of interest includes the study of paintings and illustrated manuscripts, particularly visual narratives. Prior to her current position, Kamar was at the Department of Islamic Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and she has just completed her dissertation at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU on a 16th century illustrated Indian Sufi romance from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. She recently co-curated the Maharaja, the Splendor of India's Royal Courts exhibition for the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. That exhibition will be on display until April 2012, and I'm sure she'd like me to invite all of you to attend that exhibition. So without any further ado, Sandow Birk.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I am a mere painter, and I spend most of my time working alone in a little room and pondering these sort of things, these big ideas, and I'm really flattered to be invited to come talk about them here. I'm gonna, just as a real short introduction to who I am and what I do and how I got to this project before we discuss it, I'm gonna show you stuff I've been doing over the course of my career in a real sort of rapid fire way. I grew up in Orange County in the suburbs of Los Angeles. I grew up near Huntington Beach, about 4 miles from the beach. When I was a kid, I could ride my bicycle to the beach, and I started surfing when I was 11 years old, and it has an influence on everything else I'm going to talk about. I've been an avid surfer my whole life, and I still surf about 4 or 5 days a week, and it's been a huge influence on where I've decided to live and places I've traveled to and things. That's Huntington Beach, where I go most days. I went to the Otis Art Institute in downtown Los Angeles. Since then, it's moved over by the beach. It's near LA Airport, but at the time I went, it was in this building in MacArthur Park, downtown LA. I studied painting. I have a BFA from there, and I did my third year of school as an exchange student with Parsons in Paris. where as a kid growing up in California, I was really amazed to take my art history classes inside the Louvre and see all these enormous, fantastic French Romantic, gigantic paintings that I had previously only seen in slides and things. Eventually, I traveled around, but wound up back in Los Angeles, where I decided I wanted to be a painter when I graduated, and took jobs working in art galleries and for art shipping companies and things for several years, sort of trying to figure out how I could go about being an artist. What would I make? What would I paint about that was meaningful or something? And sort of floundered around for quite a while, and eventually, out of frustration, decided to follow that old adage where they say, write what you know. I thought, okay, well, paint what I know, and what I know is surfing, so I'm going to paint about surfing, because no one's really painted about it in the way that it affects my daily life. So I took my experiences studying in Europe and started doing enormous paintings about surfing that were based on these sort of French Romantic paintings that I had seen during my studies. I was living in a small storefront studio in South Central Los Angeles because I didn't have much money. I did surfing paintings for several years, and eventually sort of took this way I had been working of taking artworks from the past and rethinking them and making them relevant to my life, and did a whole series of paintings about life in Los Angeles in the 90s, about gang wars and the Crips and the Bloods and things. This is the Crips and the Bloods symbolically exchanging colors when they actually did call a truce during the 4 days of rioting after the Rodney King verdicts in 1992. So eventually I sort of had been doing these like spoof history paintings, and with the events of the riots, which were really momentous if you lived in Los Angeles, and the O.J. Simpson trial and all these sort of things, sort of monumental events happening, I sort of gradually became a history painter of life in Los Angeles. I started showing in San Francisco about 15 years ago and started spending a lot of time in the city, where I was invariably mocked for living in LA. Which led to an enormous multi-year project I did of paintings and prints and drawings all about a fictional war between San Francisco and Los Angeles. This is the Battle of Los Angeles when San Francisco Army invades LA. It was a huge project. It went on for many years. It was an exhibition at the Laguna Art Museum that became a short film that we made, a 45-minute fake documentary spoof of Ken Burns' Civil War television show, which is available on Netflix if you're interested. But I had sort of, over the years, started doing these projects that got bigger and bigger, sort of unintentionally. I would have an idea, and they would sort of grow and become these multi-painting, multi-drawing things that turned into movies and things. I accidentally stumbled on an old copy of The Divine Comedy in a used bookstore by my house, which I had never read. I bought it for $4, and that embarked me on a 5-year project to illustrate and rewrite the entire Divine Comedy into contemporary American slang. It was a long project, which really sent me on this sort of intellectual path of studying Dante and learning about and traveling to Italy and to see Florence and everything, working with scholars. And again, from this one little stumbling on this book, it led to this whole giant project, which eventually became 3 books, which are also finished and available. But this project started to get me interested in the idea of text and imagery, and how I was doing illustrations of a text, but the pictures I were doing weren't actually illustrations. They were sort of commentary on the text. So they were the opposite of idea of what illustrations are. It's almost like they were contrasting ideas to what the text was saying. I was invited around this time to do a print project at an art school in Hawaii. I didn't know anything about printmaking, and I went over there and started, as I often do when I'm looking for a new project, I started flipping through their library about the history of printmaking. Stumbled on a book about a series of tiny little etchings called The Miseries of War by a French artist named Jacques Callot, which were done in the 1600s. An amazing series of tiny little etchings all about the 30 Years' War, which were then the inspiration for Goya's war etchings in the 1800s, and now in the 2000s, it gave me the idea to do a series of prints about the war in Iraq. Working with a printmaker there, he thought it was a great idea, and he said rather than do little prints sort of based on these little prints from the 1600s, what we should do is really big prints based on these little prints from the 1600s. So we did these huge prints, carved woodblock prints carved out of sheets of plywood. And that's one of the pieces of plywood there when it's carved. And it became a series of 16 enormous 4-foot by 8-foot etchings about the war in Iraq, sort of telling the story of the war from its beginnings and the attacks of 9/11 to the troops training and flying off to war. And this is a battle for the mosque in Fallujah. This is American troops rounding up citizens, scenes from Abu Ghraib. And the second to the last image is the execution of Saddam Hussein. And the final image is Americans, veterans coming home, missing limbs and things. This was a project, again, it started with a little idea, it became really big, it started to involve a whole team of people. There were assistants working on the carving, and there was assistants printing. This project really grew out of frustration at the war in Iraq, that the war in Iraq was beginning, that we couldn't do anything about it, that the government, the American government wasn't listening to us, people that were against the war. But this project took about 1.5 years, and it also involved a series of paintings I did. The project involved me going back and forth to Hawaii several times as they worked on the prints, and as I'd come back to my studio in Los Angeles, I would work on a series of paintings that went with them. This is my painting, my ironic painting of the liberation of Baghdad. It was meant to depict sort of what Donald Rumsfeld told us would happen when the Americans rolled into Baghdad, that the happy people would come out with flowers and candy and be thrilled to be liberated like the Parisians in the Second World War. Down at the bottom left, you can see 2 dogs fighting to symbolize the ongoing problems that would carry on for a decade. This is my painting, The Riddle of the Sphinx, taking sort of the Greek myth of, and the paintings that I did started to use the American soldier as sort of an icon, as sort of a symbol, much like the American cowboy is. So in this painting, it's sort of saying, like, if you're for the war in Iraq or against the war in Iraq, the problem, a few years ago was now, how do we get out of the war in Iraq? And it's sort of the eternal question of the Middle East is the riddle for the American soldier. So I had done this big project based on the Divine Comedy, and been interested in the idea of text and imagery and how they went together. I spent 5 years working on the Divine Comedy and was really, really involved in Catholicism and studying Dante's Catholic view of the world and everything. And then carrying on and doing a project about the war in Iraq and thinking about the global events that were happening under the Bush administration. It all sort of led me to the Quran. At some point, I realized that through my lifelong surfing travels, I had made 10 trips to different Islamic regions of the world, from Morocco several times to Indonesia to southern Philippines, and all these places where I had had fantastic experiences, and been in these Medinas and heard the call to prayer and eaten this fantastic food. And and here I was, living in America, where the whole discussion about what Islam was had nothing to do with the experiences I had had in my travels. And at some point, I just picked up a copy of the Quran, a paperback at Barnes and Nobles or something, and started reading it and pondering it myself. And the idea of sort of doing an illuminated manuscript version of the Quran came to me. I was really sort of intimidated by the idea for many reasons, and had it rolling around in my head for a year or so. And then on another surfing trip to Ireland, I stumbled on the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, just sort of walked in as a tourist, and it turns out they have, I believe they have the second largest collection of Qurans in the world outside of Cairo. And there I saw, case after case of these fantastically beautiful handmade Quranic manuscripts that spanned 1,000 years from, the year 1000 to 1700s. And seeing those manuscripts firsthand was really, much like my going to school in Paris, it was really, really inspiring to see the artworks firsthand. I had been looking at a lot of works like this for off and on for a year, pondering this idea, and was really intimidated at how complex these artworks were. But then seeing them in person, it was really fantastic to see. You could really see their handmade quality, the little tiny places where the paint went outside of the lines, or little smudges and things. And it really sort of made them really personal, and it also made me feel like this is sort of an undertaking that I could do myself, which led me to my own project. These are kind of artworks I was looking at in museums and things. And it led me to my own project, which I've been calling American Quran, which is really simply an attempt to make an entirely handmade, hand-transcribed manuscript of the Quran, all illuminated with scenes of contemporary life in America. So that's how I got to where I am, and this is what we're discussing tonight.
Can you go through a few more of these images and just talk about what is going on? On the one hand, we have the transcribed text from a translation of the Quran, and then we have the paintings. So I can see that there are two narratives going on. Can you talk a little bit about your process of how you come to these? How do you work with the text on the one hand, and then what you decide to paint for them?
Yeah, it's a lot of thought went into before I began, like what sort of format to use, and I sort of took a sort of a general standard size of ancient, like Quranic manuscripts that were about this big when the book was opened. And then I tried to carry on the whole sort of border motifs and this system of numbering the verses here, where the numbers in the margins number every 10th verse. So in the text, each little gold medallion marks the end of a verse, and then each 10th verse is marked on the side. So that's verse 30 and verse 40. And this is a sort of a traditional manuscript thing, and the borders and much of the colors I've drawn from the traditional manuscripts that I've seen. And then the English language, the version I'm doing is entirely in English, and the text I'm largely using is based on R.M. Rodwell's English translation from 1860, which is not the best translation to use, but it's copyright free. So that's a legal benefit. I consult many more contemporary translations than that, but that's largely the text.
So how did you begin the project? You started from the first chapter, and are you moving in sequential order, or are you following some other sequence? Are you going chapter by chapter?
I go chapter by chapter. I did not start at the beginning. As you know, the Quran is organized with generally the longest chapters are at the beginning, and then the shortest are at the end. So I started somewhere in the middle. And also, as you know, the Quran, the chapters are not organized chronologically as they were received by Muhammad himself. So as a book itself, it's not necessarily chronological, so there was no need for me to start at the beginning. So I started somewhere in the middle, sort of to get a feeling for it, and with smaller chapters that I was able to think about easier. And then I sort of jump around and do different ones. For one reason is because I am a painter, and the result of this project so far has been that I do a series of pages, sort of, and then have an exhibition of them. And part of the way that artists think about exhibitions is you think about what the room is going to be like, and so sometimes I want to have a variety of short chapters and long chapters and different things like that.
So can you walk us through, pick a painting and walk us through what's going on, because right now it's like a little difficult to read the script, so
much of the imagery is, well, I guess what I did was I sort of intentionally went about this project by saying to myself, like a false naivete, sort of. I said to myself, let's just like sort of forget everything I know or have been told about the Quran and just really take it at face value. And the Quran is believed to be the verbatim words of God that were received by Muhammad and spoken by him, and then written down and collected into the Quran as a message for all humanity. So I thought, well, I'm a human and I'm living in the world. What could this message possibly mean to me in my daily life? So I read the verses of the Quran and I think, you know, what is there in my life as an American or as a Californian that, you know, that is metaphorical for this, or that is connected to it somehow. Many different things.
So what is the relationship between the text and the image? Like, do you have a visual narrative in mind before you get to the text, or do you start only by reading the text and then moving from there? And I'm sure there's at some point a dialogue as well where a particular composition or a particular subject matter gets shifted as you are going through writing the text and then working through it. So what are the different scenarios that come up in the process aspect?
Well, I start out by reading it, and then by reading just the text itself, and then I read commentaries about it and read background on it and like sort of analysis of it and other people's comments, and then I start by transcribing the words and then building the framework, and then over the course of several days sort of pondering, you know, the parables of the chapter that I've read or something, and I just sort of either try to let something sort of come to me that suggests itself. For example, this is a passage here that talks about how Muhammad is a messenger and he's sending the message out, and it's all about spreading the word and things. So the scene I've chosen is a newspaper printing press where they're packing the newspapers, and it's sort of an example in our world of how messages are printed and distributed to a large mass of people. This is a chapter that talks about the Virgin Mary, and so in the Hispanic neighborhood I live in Los Angeles, just walking around and going to the supermarket, I often see the Virgin Mary painted on the side of liquor stores and things, and so it was like, this is the Virgin Mary in the life that I lead every day. This is a more sort of literal one. This is a passage, several page long chapter that tells the story of, I believe it's Joseph, and his sort of, all these trials and tribulations he goes to, and his brothers like sell him into slavery and everything. and at one point he's thrown into prison. So this is a scene of Mexican illegal immigrants crossing the border and getting stopped, sort of being caught by the authority figures and things. This is a passage that talks about the flood of Noah, and the scene I've chosen is the flood Katrina in New Orleans. You know, there's a lot of passages in the Quran that talk about the flood of Noah, and it describes it and how devastating it was. And you know, so often when you read biblical things or Quranic things, there are these giant catastrophic things in the world, and as a normal person, you're sitting there and it's just really hard to comprehend like destruction on that scale. But then you think, oh well, I do remember what it's like when an entire city is wiped out by flood. And so Katrina seemed like a good metaphor for that. This is a passage talking about simply when you die, the judgment day is coming. At the end of your life, you will be judged. So it's a scene of an everyday sort of American funeral. This is a television talk show. Again, it's another passage talking about the message coming and messages being dispersed. And much of the Quran talks about how God has sent previous messengers before Muhammad, and Noah and Moses and Jesus, and these messengers have come down into the world and dispersed the message, and people have listened or not listened. So.
The worldview that you present here is not very upbeat, and kind of, you know, through the paintings, our contemporary life does not look very upbeat and energetic, but pulls together quite a range of things.
Well, yeah, I'm not a religious person. I wasn't really raised as a religious person, but I have spent the last 10 years pondering the Divine Comedy and pondering the Quran, and reading these things and really thinking about them all day and night. And I realized I've sort of, to myself, this religious sort of experience is so often your brain is really thinking about these enormous, like, beyond worldly things. You're thinking about life, you're thinking about life after life, you're thinking about all these things, but as your brain is thinking these things, you're standing in line at the ATM machine. And so there's sort of this real contrast to me about what you're actually doing in your daily life and what you're pondering in your head. And so I often show really sort of the mundaneness of life in America, in which the people in it might be pondering these things, or you might be pondering them yourself as you go about ordering food at a Chinese restaurant or something.
This subject comes at a moment when there are so many different attitudes towards the Quran, and it's become a bigger political thing with the war and all of that, and the attitude towards image making among certain groups as it pertains to the Quran. How did that play in, if it did, into this enormous project?
Well, it definitely does, and this is an example. This is a scene of the American troops in Baghdad. My imaginary view of it, sort of put together from photos that I collected from the newspaper articles and things. But I mean, yeah, I was constantly aware of the fact that the U.S. troops are in two Islamic countries. It's
Well, I'm also thinking right now, partly because of the, Van Gogh and sorry, not Van Gogh, but the Dutch.
The political cartoons.
Yeah, political cartoons, and the sensitivity that is prevalent towards religious subject matter. And did you feel challenged by any of that when you're doing something like this?
I felt slightly apprehensive. I was sort of just beginning this project when the whole riots in Denmark occurred, and you know, it's an extremely sensitive topic. I was aware of that, but I guess I sort of thought to myself that I was interested in it. I wanted to do it because of my own interest. I wanted to learn as I was working on it. I thought I was approaching it out of respect and genuine interest, and I hoped that as I carried on, this might become evident. But what I did do, sort of out of apprehension, was I worked on this project sort of secretly in my studio for about a year and a half, and at first just sort of doing a few pages to see if it was even physically possible for me to do, and seeing if it would be possible to even carry on and complete the entire Quran as I intend to do. And then to get a few pages to see how they might sort of fit together. And then as I did maybe 10 or 15 pages, then I went to speak to my two art galleries that I work with, one in San Francisco and one in LA, and sort of proposed the project to them. And I felt I had a sufficient body of work that they could sort of see what I was aiming at. And then they were just extremely enthusiastic right off the bat. So, but also slightly apprehensive about putting on a show. So the two galleries in LA and San Francisco got together with me, and one thing that I thought would help the project to be sort of premiered to a public or presented to a public for the very first time was that if I did a significant body of work to start with, and then when we scheduled it so the two exhibitions opened in LA and San Francisco on the same day. And so I had done, I believe, 40 pages in one and 40 in the other. So I'd done about 80 pages over a year and a half or something. And so we felt that, 80 pages was a big amount of work, and it sort of just debuted, and then it was presented, and we thought, at least this would give the sense that this wasn't a flippant thing. This wasn't done casually, that there had been a lot of effort and thought going into this project.
So did you, what kind of responses have you got to this, and who is the intended audience for this work, and what kind of feedback have you received yet?
I guess in my head the intended audience would be sort of average Americans. Americans, not necessarily Muslims, but Americans that might not know anything about the Quran. And I thought, I think due to political events in the last 10 years, the Quran is probably the most important book in the world, and much of the United States governmental policy is being driven by things related to the Quran, and Americans almost know nothing about it. And I thought, wow, at least Americans should have some sort of familiarity with this book as a text. And I thought maybe through some small way my project might make the Quranic text more accessible to Americans, and make Americans see it as, rather than something completely foreign to American culture, that this is a text that can be relevant to American life. That said, that was just sort of my dream. I don't know how successful it's been at reaching a large audience, at least at this point. But once it did start getting exhibited, it's been exhibited about 5 or 6 times so far, and it's still ongoing. It's gotten a lot of interest. A lot of interest from Muslim groups have come to see the exhibitions. There's been very little negative criticism, and usually the negative criticism has come from emails to the galleries from people that haven't seen the show at all. They've just sort of heard about it and are offended just by the idea of it. And I can skip ahead and
I know fatwa's passed on you yet.
Show you a relevant image, but when the show was up in New York recently, it got all around the Islamic community that the show was up. and people were coming to see it. And at one point during that time of day, they called a prayer. This is people in the gallery praying to a mihrab that I had made, which is indicating the direction of Mecca. So that was interesting.
Unexpected?
It was quite unexpected, yeah.
So, I think
just to finish that thought, there has been the most quantity of angry emails sent anonymously to the galleries have come from right-wing Christian religious groups that have sent threatening things saying that Americans should not be reading the Quran, that galleries should not be showing this thing and promoting the Quran. So that was unexpected. Maybe it should have been expected, but I didn't foresee that.
It just goes to show that we need to wrap up this session and then open up questions to the floor. Where do you go next? How far are you along in this project? What is the intended scope of it? And then what do you plan to do with this enormous body of work once you're finished with the paintings?
Yeah.
There are 114 surahs. How far?
The Quran is 114 chapters. I'm sort of envisioning, as far as I can predict, that when finished it'll be about 220 pages long. And I've done about 160, so I'm about 75% of the way done. I've been having exhibitions sort of as I finish, a group of about 40 new pages, have an exhibition, and then just last year in March, they took, I was about halfway finished, and they took all of the pages I had finished and put them together into one big exhibition at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. And that show is now going to Grinnell College in Iowa, which is opening next week. But the final goal is to finish the entire thing, have it put together as a book, reproduction as a book, and have an exhibition of all the works. And that's being planned now, which would be in about a year and a half from now.
That's exciting. I look forward to actually seeing the book. I think the book experience would be quite an immediate and a very different one from seeing them on the wall.
Yeah.
So keep us posted.
Okay.
So I'd like to open up the questions to the floor, and there's one at the back. I think a microphone is coming your way.
Thank you. First, let me say I very much appreciate the artwork you've done. I think it's very nice work. But let me add, as a Muslim, I'm very much offended with the work that I see. First of all, I think it's very important that I would hope that Americans do not get to know Quran through this kind of work, because it is very important. I highly recommend, if you're reading Quran, make sure you read it with the Arabic along with it when there is English, because the only thing that has kept the authenticity of Quran is having that the Arabic along with it. Separating the two creates a diversion that over time the authenticity will be lost. I highly recommend anybody picking up an English Quran, make sure there is Arabic next to it, because that's what it keeps it solid. And secondly, I think it's really important to also keep in mind what is sacred to Muslims. And you say you are not a religious person, so it's really important to be sensitive toward what is important to Muslims. For example, this chapter about Mary, it's very sacred. And especially as a woman, when I see there is a chapter about Mary and how highly a woman has been appraised in Islam, I don't like to see that chapter next to a liquor store where liquor is not, is not allowed in Islam. So I think you need to keep in mind what is important to Muslims and not to damage what is sacred. And I think some of the selections of artwork, along with what those chapters are very irrelevant. So overall, as a Muslim, I'm very offended with your work. I appreciate the artwork, the work you've done, but I think you have not been sensitive toward what is sacred for us.
I'm very aware of the fact that a Quran without the Arabic is not a Quran, and intentionally I left it out. I left out the Arabic out of sensitivity. I thought, you know, this is a project. This is a personal project. This is my own envision of what these passages mean to me, or the things that come to me when I'm reading these things and pondering them. It's always meant to be a personal thing. So I'm aware of that. I think it is interesting. It's been mentioned before in discussions like this. Muslims have said, "Oh, you shouldn't depict, you know, women with short sleeves or something, or you shouldn't depict the things that are banned in the imagery." And I think that's odd, because in the whole history of artwork of depicting religious themes, you don't just show what's the good thing. The whole purpose of the art is to show sort of the bad. I mean, there's this whole tradition of showing the flood. You don't show everyone's behaving and doing well. You show what happens when everyone is evil and does bad, and the punishment that's coming, because that's sort of the history of visual artwork, is that it depicts the threat of the punishment that will come.
Well, just a personal observation. I saw your work in the gallery, and there was one that particularly resonated with me. The text was talking about the futility and like how this world is so transient, and do not get absorbed in this world, and or the materiality of this world. And the painting around it was the sea of cubicles, and the mundanity of the life of the material world that we are all so absorbed in. And I'm Muslim myself, but that image kind of really resonated with me in a way that it translated the core message of that particular passage into our own lives, and how we are in some ways so absorbed by the here and now, and the trivial things that don't matter. And so it kind of reinforced the essence of that message. But you had a question?
Yeah.
There's a microphone, please.
Yeah, very interesting. And a few thoughts that I try to stitch together here. It seems to me the illustrations, to me, show some sort of disconnect among the people, and on a level of family, maybe disconnect among the family. I think about Edward Hopper's paintings as an example of that. And the illustrations, in a way, seem to be about a world that is alienated from God. And I'm thinking, I don't know the history of this kind of artwork, but I'm guessing that generally when the Quran is illustrated, it's not illustrated with the idea, with images that show the alienation from God, although maybe I'm wrong about that. And further interesting is it's a project that's been created by somebody who doesn't believe in God. And so all of this creates a sort of postmodern disconnect in the images in relation to the text and in relation to the spiritual meditation of the original text. And it's sort of a Quran for the 20th century American atheist. And I just wondered if you have any comment on that. The earlier speaker expressed a reaction to that. I wonder if you have any thoughts about those ideas.
That might be a good description of it. I didn't say I did not believe in God. I said I wasn't particularly religious. I mean, in the sense I wasn't raised in any sort of religious tradition beyond a couple of trips to Sunday school or something. But yeah, I think that might be a good description. Another real criticism that's come from the Muslim community is that I've been calling the project an American Quran, and a really interesting and valid point is they say there is no such thing as an American Quran. There is the Quran, and that's it. And I agree with that. The title that I've given it is just, so far, it's just been the titles of the exhibitions, and it is sort of two words that sum up what I'm doing. It's an American view of the Quran, an American person's view of the Quran. But yeah, yeah.
Hi there, my name is Ramzi Salti. I teach Arabic here at Stanford, and I was also very impressed by your artwork. I am from the Middle East. I was brought up in Lebanon and Jordan, but we are from a Christian family, but we were brought up to revere the Quran, to respect it, and in many ways to live by the same rules. And I think one of the things that maybe the audience is not quite understanding, or I hope that they're understanding, is that when we read the Bible, we all know that we're reading it in a translation. It wasn't written in this way. The Quran, as the lady said over there, was written in Arabic and has been preserved in Arabic so that you don't have room for later to say that word meant this in that context. So when you read it in Arabic, and this is after 13 years of teaching Arabic to Americans here, and I'm a proud American myself, is that you really do lose something in the quote-unquote translation. This is more of an interpretation of the Quranic verses, and in no way should this be used to replace the actual text. Having said that, your artwork is amazing, and I applaud your effort, but I do stress what the nice lady said over there, which is to read the Arabic text and to try to even, access it even via somebody who speaks Arabic. But a great effort there. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I'm totally aware of these things. When I'm working on these alone, I often listen to the Quran being sung on, and I have tapes of it and things. I'm very aware of that whole thing. I'm very interested in all that. But one thing I think that doesn't get discussed when I talk to a group like you that aren't necessarily artists or something is, I'm not coming as someone, as any sort of religious scholar at all. I'm an artist, and one thing as an artist in the 21st century that concerns me is what is the role of the artist? What can paintings do in the world today, in the world of television and videos and the internet? And one thing that's interesting to me is the idea of manuscripts, of handmade manuscripts from the Middle Ages, whether they're Christian or Quranic. The idea of one person making an entire book, handwriting it and illuminating it in something, that's something that only an artist can still do in the 21st century. And that's something that I'm interested in trying to do just as an artwork.
So I have a question for you. I'm going to sort of challenge one of the things you said in a very sort of friendly way. You say you're not a religious person, but you surf 4 to 5 times a week. And you probably, all those days that you're surfing, and probably more so, you're in your studio working. So I'd like to know, as you're approaching a project like this and any other project, or let's say this project, how does your daily practice as a surfer inform the way that you approach a project like this? Is there a particular sort of stance or footing that you adopt, given your daily practice?
Oh, I guess, I've been surfing since I was a little kid, and I don't really think about it that much. It's just something I do every day, but it is sort of the time that I spend alone in the water and out in nature and thinking a lot and things. So I guess there is that's my little spiritual time of my life, and although I don't really maybe name it that. But when I say I'm not religious, I mean I wasn't really raised with any religion and or going to any religious institutions as I grew up or anything. But as I've done this, this project about the Divine Comedy and this project, I've been extremely interested in religion in the world. Working on this project the last 5 years, I've intentionally gone back to Morocco several times. I've been to Indonesia again. I've been to Dublin again to visit the museum several times. I'm fascinated, and I'm constantly learning, and it's constantly interesting and challenging to me to think about these things. So.
Yes, yeah, I'm very interested by this work and very puzzled as well. I think, first of all, this is not a Quran. This is not the Quran in terms of ontology. This is not possibly, I mean, it's impossible. It's literally impossible. There is no Arabic, and there are images, and this is putting the Word of God in a context, in a configuration which is the mundane, and with images, and this is not possible. So this is a projection, this is an appropriation of a book. And actually, these images could be, these images and these texts could be a Sufi text, it could be another book with the same type of visual configuration. It happens that you appropriate the Quran, but I think that it has to be understood as something different from the Quran, extremely different, ontologically speaking. And there is no offense as long as there is this notion that this is not a Quran at all. I would like to remind or to recall that when the Quran was produced, there was this debate about the created Quran and the uncreated Quran, with the separation between the form, the language, even the language is a form already. And there was this extraordinary philosophical debate about the ontological status of the Quran, as the Quran as a book, as a separate entity. Some philosophers advocated this idea that even the Quran as a book is different from its semantic, its message. The message is something separated from the place where this message is put, and through the message is separated from the means by which the message is communicated, which is the book, the writing, the letters, even the speech is a form. So there is a whole phenomenology of the Quran that literally separates the form from the message itself, the semantics from the form. So we could understand and accept. I'm not a believer, I don't believe in God, but I'm a specialist of Islam. So I can see how this can be inscribed and can be legitimate. That's the story. Because the Quran belongs to anybody, everybody, the believer, the unbeliever, it's a message. So that's how I would see. Now, what is very interesting here is that by its very existence, this work is raising all these questions. And we are seeing and debating and thinking about all the contrasts, the paradoxes, the conflicts that are related to scripture in general, particularly with Islam, because the Quran is directly the message of God. But even when it was produced, there was already this debate about the separation of the book and the message. Thank you.
Yes. Somebody in the front.
I have a question about your studio practice. You started this quite a while ago, and there's many pieces to it. Has there been an evolution from how you approach the pieces you're working on now from where you started before, at the beginning?
Yeah, sure, there has. I've been working on this for 5 years. I think it'll take about another 1.5 years to finish. There has been, because previously I never painted that small before, and so that was learning, and I believe over the years I've gotten better. And I foresaw that happening before I even began, so it was also one of the reasons I sort of jumped around with the idea that if I had started at the beginning, you would see the whole thing get better and better as you go through, but if you intersperse it, it doesn't really show up as much.
Yes, we attended an exhibition of yours in San Francisco, and I have a poster from there. Besides this one, I don't see any of the others that were exhibited in that exhibition, which depicted the war in Iraq and Afghanistan as a backdrop to the ayats that you were using. And we came away feeling very disturbed. So most of what you're showing today is not depicting the war, not depicting those imagery that you had presented then. I applaud your effort of introducing the Quran to the American public. First of all, as has been said, that saying that this is the American Quran is the wrong message. Because as you said, there is no such thing as an American Quran. It is just the Quran. Secondly, the translation that you have used and the depiction of the translation in your own estimation is correct. When somebody else sees it, there is a different interpretation to it. What disturbed me most was the violence that went with the ayahs that we saw in the exhibition. So I am not sure whether those were your beginning paintings, and they were, I guess. And you have, over the period, changed the images. But I think your effort to introduce the Quran to the American public it's kind of skewed, in my opinion. But I applaud your thought of it.
Okay, there's a question. One there and then one at the back of the room, please.
Hi. I was interested in your comment that part of your motivation was your appreciation of ancient manuscripts that were all done by hand. And I think you're doing it in this way to do a modern version of handwritten ancient manuscripts. This is completely in the artistic tradition. I could imagine that after this, I mean, you pick the Quran perhaps as the first example. If you go into libraries, you see ancient manuscripts, which are prayer books, manuscripts by Archimedes, for example, elaborately engraved and handwritten in the days before they could be mass-produced. And I commend you for thinking that this is a tradition that has been lost because of printing and mass production and mass media, and your interest in reviving that, so to speak, and using this as an example. It's your creation. It's completely within the artistic tradition, in my opinion. If you want to see the Quran in Arabic, you have plenty of opportunity to do that. This is your way of introducing an ancient handwritten manuscript tradition to the modern world, and I commend you for that.
So I can't help have gone through multiple reactions as you went through your presentation. So not all of them are negative. It is a good way. I'm a Muslim. I always am the one that's randomly selected at airports. It's just how random works. So this is not particularly a bad way of introducing Quran to the American people. But there are some scenes in there which are disturbing to me. The Muslim tradition dictates that though I drink myself, you're not supposed to drink. And there is this scene in there, in the restaurant, where there is obviously a cocktail glass and there's beer. If you go to the scene with the restaurant. And there's cocktail, there's a martini. So right interlaced with the words of the Quran, having exactly what it tells you not to do, is, I think, disturbing and disrespectful to the culture. And that to me is disturbing. Some of the other things is your depiction of the Quran, though this might be your own interpretation, is that half the images in there, and the lady over there said there was more, is with guns. So I don't know if this is viewpoint you have, but like half the things are interlaced with guns and tanks. So if I'm the American TSA agent who's going to randomly select me, and I read this Quran, the American Quran, it is hard for me not to tie Quran, the biases that TV already has given me, with the guns and the tanks that are already evident in your work, further ruining my random selection chances at the airport, right? So it is quite disturbing to me from a number of ways in which the traditions, and another thing which you might have encountered is the images that you showed of the Quran. They do not depict, and I believe this is the question you were trying to get at earlier, are not depictions of humans or animals. They are of geometric, and Islamic art is primarily geometric. Now, I'm not a very religious person. I just mentioned I do drink myself, but Islamic tradition dictates that you don't draw human figures. And this is something else that you have violated in the Islamic expectations and the tradition by drawing people who are drinking and people which are, these are the things that disturbed me. Like I said, there is positive sides potentially, but it is disturbing.
Well, just to, I mean, images do show up very early in Islamic culture, and they continue all throughout. So the only place where images typically do not show up are in a strictly religious context, which is why a Quran is usually not illustrated, it is illuminated with floral, geometric, and other types of designs. Or within a mosque, typically you do not see human or animal representations. But beyond those contexts, images are everywhere. We just saw some examples of some beautiful illustrated manuscripts that were illustrating poetry. I think you'd shown copies of the Shahnameh and other texts from Nizami and others. Images show up in textiles, images show up in architecture. They're actually all over. So in this particular context, I think that's what adds to the tension in the work, is that you don't normally see illustrations with religious texts. You see them perhaps in mystical texts. So the Sufi texts, you would see them, or other poetic texts with mystical undertones, but not in didactic religious texts. So just to clarify that point.
I would also say I've done so far about 140 pages, and I think only maybe 4 or 5 have anything to do with warfare. And in every scene of those, the troops depicted are always the Americans, and they're always the ones that are doing the evil things. Or, you know, and those are in specific surahs in which they discuss sort of the rules of warfare and things. And they show the Americans as the invading force and things like that. So that's just one thing. But again, I would say, you know, I'm not an Islamic person. I'm not coming out of the Islamic art tradition. I'm a Western artist coming out of the Western art tradition. You know, there's not that many paintings of Adam and Eve happy in the garden, but there's an awful lot of paintings of Adam and Eve eating the apple. And that's the one thing you're not supposed to do. And that's what's always painted, is the thing you're not supposed to do, as the warning, you know. So it says in the text right there, maybe you're not supposed to drink, and there's pictures of people drinking. The image doesn't have to show the good, it has to show what you're being warned against, perhaps. That's the way I think.
I have a couple questions. First of all, I'd like to commend the author for his creative impulse, and I'm really intrigued by this idea to create 21st century miniature style Quran in the English language. And we have to keep in mind that the notion of, I mean, for people who don't know Arabic, for people who have been born and raised in America, this is one way to approach the Quran, and it's certainly very, very controversial. Now, I have 2 questions. The first one is, when you were doing this over a number of years, I guess first one of the top issues in your mind was the issue of translatability when you were reading and listening to the Quran. So if you could share with us, what do you find, let's say, several of the most important messages of the Quran that are most readily translatable to American audience, and maybe if there are ones that are untranslatable in your opinion, what, if anything, was untranslatable or hard to translate? That's the first question. And then the second question is, if one looks at this, for example, especially abroad, non-American, somebody who has never been to America, reading the text, but especially going off of the miniature, what would they learn based on the pictures? What would they learn? Would it be about 21st century world, international situations, problems? Would it be about America, California? What would they learn looking at the pictures that you have selected to draw to accompany the text of the Quran?
Well, the images aren't meant to be didactic. They're not meant to tell you anything. They're meant to be sort of my own ponderings. The text, these are my own ponderings. You should come up with your own. It's not, the images aren't illustrations of the text. They're not a picture of what the text says. There's metaphors for what possibly could be suggested by the text. And each person will surely have their own. But as far as specific messages of the Quran, I would say, in super general short answer, my happiness and wonder at the Quran since I've started reading it it's just so familiar, and it's so familiar as coming from a Western, Christian culture. It's the same stories. It's Adam and Eve. It's Noah's Ark. It's all the stories again and again, and it's the same message. There is one God. Be a good person, or you will go to hell. It's so a familiar message. It's really astonishing to me, the clash between the two cultures.
There's somebody else behind you. We'll get to you next.
Thank you for coming out, and thank you for showing this. I applaud you because I think you're an equal opportunity offender, and I think, I don't know, but I would imagine maybe that's where you're going with this. If I come from, I just opened this up, which I did sitting back here, and I look at it, and I see militaristic, fat, lazy Americans, which is a good percentage of us, that I'm deeply offended. And if this were a sacred text to me, or a slant on a sacred text, which I don't know, that's not what's going on here, to me, then I'm absolutely offended. And then you put them both together, and I don't have to be from either side of them, and I'm offended because you put them together. So what I want to know is, and I think it's being very innocently portrayed. At least I hope it is. What I get from this is that there's such an absurdity with the militarism and with the overzealous religious extremists, and I mean the gluttony of all of it. So it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. There's just such an absurdity with where we as humans have taken all sorts of bends, whether it's food or religion or whatever it happens to be. I was wondering if that is am I even close with any of that? Are you looking to challenge everybody on an individual basis? Because I get it then, and I really like it then, and that's what I want. I mean, so I'm putting into it what I want. But is that because you can't be innocently sitting there and saying, oh well, these are American scenes, and here's some farmers, and here's whatever, and here's a really religious text, and and the tradition of it was handwritten, but I'm not getting that. So I want you to come clean and say, well, yeah, I'm trying to piss people off and get them to think.
There's absolutely no intention to piss anyone off. I'm a painter, and I believe I'm painting life in America today. If I walk down the street and half the people are fat, then I paint half the people in my painting fat. It's not it's a reality. I don't know if it's not really a criticism. It's just what it is. I'm aware of. I lost my train of thought. But no, it's not. There was absolutely no intention of pissing people off. You know, I've done it with all thought. You know, I haven't dedicated 5 years of my life to this, just in a flippant way, just to make some people slightly angry. I've put a lot of time and effort and thought into this, and I find it challenging and interesting.
I just wanted to say on that note, I teach Dante's comedy here at Stanford, and I study it. I'm doing my PhD on it. And I see a real similarity between that, between your illustrations of your paintings of that text and your American Quran, which is that it's not designed, your Divine Comedy is not designed to be the Divine Comedy the way that Dante wrote it, but the Divine Comedy within our contemporary imagination, how we as Americans can access it. And I use it in my classroom with the hope that I can juxtapose your Divine Comedy with Dante's Divine Comedy and think about that tension that's being created there in a really productive way. I can't imagine that, I would hope that no American would approach your Quran and assume that that is the Quran without some kind of productive tension being produced there, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're discussing here is how that productive tension operates.
I guess touching on what you just said, when I first read about this, I went to the website and started looking at your work, and my objection is that illustrations are limiting, and my Quran is free. Like it's not limited to just one image, but I understand it's your interpretation, and I look at it as an art project. But it got me thinking, so I started looking at my younger kids who have not had that same relationship that I have with the Quran, and I started asking them what they thought about it. And one of them was immediately saying, "Well, yeah, if this is what he thinks, yeah, I definitely like it." And kind of your view versus my view. One of them was like, "Yeah, that probably is going to get more people interested in it than others." So, as I said, I'm not offended by your work. I just think it's limiting in terms of just having that book illustrated in certain images, but it definitely gets us further on in the dialogue or in the exposure. I thank you for it.
Well, I have an idea I did want to say. I'm very aware that I'm a Western artist and I'm a Western person, and coming at this text with no one to guide me and doing it all on my own intentionally, and how I sort of approach the text when I'm thinking of these images is a lot coming from this sort of Western Christian way. I remember when my parents would take me to church the few times. The Western way that you go to church here is you go to the church and the preacher reads like a short passage from the Bible for 5 minutes and then spends 30 minutes sort of discussing what does this mean to our life every day. And that's sort of how I approach this. What does this mean to me as I go to the supermarket, to me as I have to park my car? How does a religious view of the world affect my mundane everyday existence? And that's a Western way of looking at things, perhaps.
Boy, as an Egyptian American Muslim studying here at Stanford University, there's a lot that I see going on here. I live in Kansas, so this image resonates with me, as they all do. I just wanted to bring back this idea of the TSA agent seeing something like this and how it might shape their perception of Muslims and treating people at the airport. I would hope that the audience looking at your artwork, has some sort of a media literacy background and responsibility. I think there's a lot of accountability there in interpreting this. But I think it's wonderful that you're bringing this into the American mainstream media, and we know how much tension and controversy that can feed into the American pop culture whenever you have TLC trying to bring a show like All American Muslim into the picture, and the controversy that brings into mainstream American life. And so this is, I feel like this is kind of a similar juxtaposition and a social commentary on the text, and how it's not so different from other Abrahamic religions, and that it is indeed an Abrahamic religion. And I thank you for highlighting that it's familiar as a message. And as far as the Virgin Mary on the side of the building at the liquor store, I mean, I think it's interesting as a social commentary, and it's interesting to see you interpret the texts as a, yeah, that's the one, as a, like, this is what I see when I'm on the corner store in LA, and this is how, as a non-religious person, this is what I'm seeing, and this is the Virgin Mary as I see represented. So it's interesting that you're saying that you're, you know, depicting this with the surah, because yeah, I'm seeing it as I'm interpreting it as this gentleman in front of me did, as a social commentary on this is the message, and this is how American culture differs from the message. So, and yeah, I just wanted to thank you. Thanks for your work, and yeah, I appreciate that you're shedding light on this issue, and also I just wanted to reiterate that I do think there's a lot of media literacy, accountability, and responsibility here for the audience, to obviously not take this as an interpretation of the Quran, but to shed light on it, and to highlight, you know, that you know, hopefully, yeah, it gets people thinking, and it gets a dialogue going between older generations of Muslims and younger generations of Muslims. I think that's a wonderful thing. So thank you.
I think it says mini market. Mercado. But, well,
yeah, it doesn't say liquor anywhere.
Well, yes, please.
I wanted to see that all this is ultimately about artistic appropriation and freedom of artistic creation. Because if we think, you know, of course, this is an artwork that triggers a lot of, first of all, which is animated with tensions and contradictions and paradoxes that are literally unsolvable. But that's what it is about. And this is not, this is a type of work that we found in other contexts. For I'm thinking about the famous Peace Christ by the Latino-American artist. I don't remember his name. I don't know if you know this work. It's a Christ which was placed by the artist's urine, inside the artist's urine. Have you heard about this art?
Yeah.
Or the Martin Scorsese's film about the Christ, the life of Christ, about all these artworks that are pushing the limits of religious rhetoric and what a religious object is, or a religious tradition is. It's about the artistic appropriation, and if we think about it from a broader viewpoint, there would be we would miss a lot of artworks if we would prevent this type of artwork to be produced, because this is part of artistic expression, and that it triggers, that it offends, it's part of the game, of the artistic game, and it should be desirable. We don't want to be constantly confined in a comfort zone. We want it to be challenged by art. That's the function of art. That's all what I wanted to say.
I would second that, being an art historian myself, looking at a lot of these types of images, that one of the things that that artworks do is create questions, force us to look again at things that we've taken for granted, and assume, and which are often taken over by a mainstream dialogue, and we stop thinking about them anymore. But sometimes when we see provocative works, they make us think again. They make us question ourselves, make us question our relationship with the thing itself, with notions, ideas, and that's what keeps keeps us active and keeps us engaged. And to the point that these texts or messages are not just restricted to a particular time and place, but that they are meant to have a longer life than a very specific time and place. And so, if not this, well, what does it mean to us? Whether or not we are practicing Muslims or just members of human society, what can we take out of this and what can we leave behind? So I think that we need this type of artwork to generate conversation, to generate dialogue. I worked with an artist very recently at the museum. He's a Hindu artist, well, from Indian background, who grew up in California, well, in LA, and is now representing Hindu texts and scripts in a very pop art way. And that in itself has generated a lot of dialogue about, is this irreverent or not? These are cutesy figures, but these are representations of gods. What does that mean? How does it become accessible to a contemporary society where we are kind of losing some of this place of God? So we need these types of jolts to our system every so often. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you all.